Welcome to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast. And you're very welcome back to the Hurling podcast with your host, Mark Kennedy, joined this week by Kieran Collins. Kieran, how are things?
I'm good, Mark, and yourself?
All good. Another weekend fast approaching, so I suppose the headlines this week and what we'll discuss. We'll look at last weekend, Munster Senior Hurling Championship, where Waterford crashed out of the Munster Hurling Championship with a comprehensive loss to Clare. We'll also look at the Joe McDonagh Cup here. We know our finalists, Offaly and Carlow, are going to be contesting at Joe McDonagh Cup final in Croke Park. Also look at the minor and under 20 roundup here in Leinster and Munster, and also look at the fixtures for Leinster and Munster Senior Hurling Championship fair. I suppose, Kieran, let's start from the start. I suppose Thurles last Saturday night, Clare facing Waterford, a pretty comprehensive win for Clare without having to really hit the top gears here.
Yeah, I think probably a game or two. I think the first half was probably, close as time. Clare weren't at their best, and I think when it gets to later stages in the All Ireland series, if Clare do manage to safely come out of Munster, you can't let that happen because you play at that level and you're going to get turned over. And I think just Waterford's so bad. You know what I mean? We've talked about them for the last two games. We've highlighted their struggles, and I think the main one of them is they're struggling to score points from play. Not to mind even mention goals, but haven't scored a goal in the last 5 games, competitive games. So that straight away is a worry. I think Clare, they were sloppy. I think they made a lot of errors in the first half. Waterford were kept at bay. Regardless how, I suppose, I wouldn't say poorly they played, but they weren't the same Clare team that we saw the week before against Limerick, 2 weeks before against Limerick. But I think in the second half there was no doubt about it. Clare came out all guns blazing, and I was talking cheese really. For Waterford, like, it's so hard to know what is gone wrong down there. We've heard I've been listening the last few days and just talk about, is it the team or is it the management? And I suppose you look back to last year and the collapse from the league form that they showed winning the league, going into championship, and that was under, I suppose, Kieran Collins' time, and then into this year, they didn't set the world alight in the league. For a team coming in with a new management, you always expect a kickback, and you expect a pick up, even if it's covering over the cracks, and it didn't seem to be there in the league. It was kind of mixed league form, and I think for the Limerick game, like, to me now looking back, it looks like that Waterford put everything into that Limerick game. Now, be it Waterford management or Waterford as a whole, I don't know. But Waterford I was at that game. Waterford were not a bad team that day. I think they set up. I mentioned this, and in the aftermath of that game, they set up to destruct Limerick and to stop them at their game. So I think they came to win it. But they were impressive in facets of that game. The work rate, they brought so many positives, and so many positives came out of it. Even though they should have won. They had their chances. And I think we've seen over the last 2 game weeks as well. Their shot count. They're scoring. To score 7 points from play at this level it's not good enough. So many wides. The 32 shots in total, scoring 16. But 17 of them shots were taken outside the 45-yard line. So I think it's just a sign of where they're shooting from. And I think a lot of them time I kind of watched the game back and froze it. And I know Stephen Bennett once or twice, and he took a shot from outside the 45, but there was no Waterford player inside him to play the ball too. So we talk about teams maybe taking one more pass or breaking the line or breaking a tackle and working in towards goal. There was actually no player inside the 45. So it was take the shot or turn back himself. And we saw that, I think, especially in the second half. Waterford were kind of going over and back the field and going backwards as opposed to going forward. If I'm going to criticise management, I think I'm not going to hold back, Davy. They're outdated. They're dinosaur tactics. They don't work anymore. This congestion in the middle third. You're pushing your defenders up. You're pulling your attackers back. Like, if you want to win a game, you have to score, and the only way you get scores is you get close to goal. And I think that's why Waterford are struggling to score. 7 points from play is a sign of that. Waterford put themselves under a lot of pressure with these tactics. Like, I've seen a couple of puckouts where they push their defenders, up forward past their own 45, and that's great if they win the ball. But and the chances that the times that they didn't win the ball, there was then a scramble to get back into position. You're coaching young lads, and the main thing you're trying to get through to them at a young age. I'm involved in under 10s this year, and we're trying to get through to them is hold their structure. And they're going against this completely. They're taking a full back line, half back, and pushing them further up the field than they should be. To some credit, I don't know why. I can't understand these pucker tactics, but that's great if they win the ball. But if they don't, they're scrambling back the field, and it's nearly like a counter attack for the opposing team. I think as well, if you look at the Clare goals, like they were Clare were under no pressure. Waterford defenders, I think, pushed up too far. They need to be sitting a lot deeper, and they leave so much space. And Clare exploited that. I think if you look at Clare's second goal in particular, Mark Fitzgerald, I think, who was sitting deep, kind of in the full back position. There were two Clare players between him and the next Waterford defender, and that Waterford defender was chasing back, but he was 5 yards off the breaking ball. So you had a 2-on-1 scenario. So Clare. It had to be a goal. There's no other way around it. I think Waterford, their defenders are too far up the field, and they seem to be always chasing back, either to chase back a defender or to try and close down space between the defender or the Clare attacker and goal. I think it's crazy tactics. And then we look at the other end. There was times there where there was no attacker inside the 45. Now I've seen this close up with Wexford over the last few years under Davy. Actually, it brings me back to the day Wexford played Clare in, I think it was the All-Ireland quarter-final. It would have been 2 years ago. And it was similar tactics where there was no player inside the 45-yard line. I think at the time, Wexford might have been 8-9 points down. And you're wondering, how are they going to get back into this game if you're not scoring? That's the point of the game, is to outscore your opponent. I just can't see. I think it's a case that the Waterford players haven't bought in. I don't think they fully believe or know what they're supposed to be doing. I recall that the Limerick game I was at, I saw firsthand was, I think when it came to puckouts, the Waterford players, you could see confusion. Like, there was no cohesion. They were kind of over back the field. They didn't understand where they were supposed to be at certain times. I think it's too tactics driven. There can only be a certain amount of management can put into players. I think the shackles have to come off when they step over the white line, and there has to be a certain amount of freedom to play their game. Obviously, they know their system and they know what way they're supposed to be playing, but it's like the Waterford players are afraid to hurl within themselves. And I think it's just too tactically driven that, it's just not working. It's just not working.
Yeah, I know that an awful lot's been talked about regarding Waterford and where they go from here. I suppose, look at the management crews that they've had in the last few years here, Kieran. I mean, even starting from Pádraig Fanning all the way, to Liam Cahill, Michael Bevins. These are all great hurling men. David Fitzgerald, they're all great hurling men. They can't be all wrong here, Kieran. It's, I don't know, with the players, it's maybe game plans, maybe a little bit complex, but I saw frustration on Saturday night, evident in that Callum Lyons sending off. Two very avoidable yellow cards, I would say. The first one particularly, third man in, when Waterford won a free, was just absolute kamikaze hurling at its finest. Really is no realms of recourse for the second one. Literally it's a trip with the hurl. So, look, Callum Lyons struck a very frustrated figure. He's a wing back. He likes to run forward. He was completely restricted in that half back. But I thought from a management perspective, the matchups, the Desi Hutchinson's not inside. I just felt, management didn't do themselves any favours here, particularly in this game as well, with their setup, Kieran.
Yeah, I think Callum Lyons, I think the first year, I think he'd have no arguments, and I think it's a sign of frustration more so as well. Yeah. But I thought the second yellow was harsh. Okay, he did trip him up, but I don't think they're, I think it was just late more than anything. I thought it was a harsh yellow. I think his face showed what he was feeling at the time. To me, Waterford didn't look comfortable on the ball. They didn't look comfortable. I think there's also a question about their fitness. I think I kind of looking at the teams and I think Desi Hutchinson or Ozzie Gleeson in particular, I thought he looked I thought he looked completely unfit. There was one stage where a clear player won the ball on him, and he just gave up chase. I think he just gassed out. The legs weren't there. You touch mark on players around positions. I think the matchups like Darragh Lyons on Tony Kelly. Darragh Lyons is a midfielder. And what midfielder? I'd say if you pick out any midfielder in the country and ask him to do a man marking job, it's not in his nature. It's not in his psyche. And I think you look at the last few years, Tony Kelly deserves special attention without a doubt. And the teams that have had success man marking him has been like Kilkenny with Mikey Butler. I've seen Wexford with Shane Reck. Cathal Barrett only recently, held him. All cornerbacks, that's cornerbacks bread and butter. It's the man mark, hold the player. I'm not saying that Waterford should have picked one of their cornerbacks, but that's more in the lines of what their job is. And I think straight away, like Darragh Lyons was 4 or 5 yards off Tony Kelly, all day. But I wouldn't blame Darragh Lyons. I think that matchup was wrong completely. We saw Dessie Hutchinson. He's just too far from goal. I think you look at the first minute or two in the second half, Dessie Hutchinson was in the corner forward position, gets the ball in, puts it over the bar because he was in the right position. But I think going back to Davy as well. I think the tactics we know are wrong, but there seems to be no. It doesn't matter how many points you're down, you're 10, 12 points down, and he's still persistent and continuing to play a sweeper. Why not throw the shackles off and just say, right, well, let's go 15 and 15. Let's go back we'll play a 3 inside and lump long ball in. I think the one time they did was Jamie Barron's half chance to goal. Not a half chance, he should have probably scored. But the ball came in high on top of Ozzie Gleeson. He broke it, and Jamie Barron got a shot at goal. Why not do that? And it was the same when David was at Wexford. There was no plan B. They did it that day, actually, I mentioned earlier with the Wexford Clare. They were taking a hammer. And they did go free that day. I think it was Davy's last game with Wexford. They started putting long ball in on top of Chin and Conor McDonald. And they reaped some rewards for it. So I think I'm not sure, is it pride or stubbornness or what to, let's admit maybe defeat and say, right, we're wrong with this. Let's go old school. Let's go 15 and 15 and see how we fare out and put the players in their natural positions. And I think, having Dessie Hutchinson out past 45 is criminal. Put him inside, get the ball into him, and I think he would do damage. But I do think there's a deeper problem in Waterford hurling than with this year and with the management. I think we look at minor, under 20 and senior, they haven't won a game this year. I think that's worrying fact, not to win one game. Their under 20s 2016 have won one game, and that was against Kerry. So I think it's a deeper problem. I think the whole of Waterford County Board need to address. I think there has to be a sit down session, or not just one, probably a few, and address what is wrong here. Why, whatever about not winning titles, but being competitive, at least minor and 20s, winning games and, possibly getting to the odd final, but not to win a game is really, really worrying. I think if you look closer, the whole Ballygunner, going for 10 in a row this year, that can't be good for club hurling. No, I'm not being harsh on Ballygunner. I'm sure they're doing everything right, and I think that's why they're winning so many, but I think it's up to other clubs to get up to their level, but any club dominating in a county cannot be good for the hurling county itself.
Yeah, no, I think you hit nail on the head there in terms of the dominance of Ballygunner. But as you say yourself, I think an awful lot of soul searching has to go on, particularly in the underage structures, particularly in your minors, your under 20s, particularly. That stat you've thrown out I think it's speaking volumes right now in terms of how these round robin games in Munster have gone for Waterford. Again, talent is certainly there in Waterford, but I think it just needs a bit more refinement. Even kind of east-west of the county, you've Waterford City, obviously, catchment areas. So again, like an awful lot of counties here, when you're hitting rock bottom, there needs to be real soul searching between the county board, the players, and prominent hurling personalities. The likes of Ken McGrath, I know, has been very vocal this week here, Kieran. But I think everyone has to be kind of buying in here and really, from a Waterford perspective, really hold some real in-depth, honest assessments and maybe get some outside help here in terms of some structures that have been implemented I'm just going to throw Offaly out there. Maybe the underage structures in Offaly have reaped the benefits here. You've seen the Offaly minors last season. The under-20s are in a final on Wednesday night against Wexford in at Watchcolumn Park. So, I mean, I think for Waterford here, their eyes and ears have to be wide open here in terms of how to improve the situation, as you say.
But even go close to the home mark, I think in our own county, Limerick, we were in the same situation not too long ago. And I think you probably add Clare to that bracket as well. Clare were in all sorts of bother there not so long ago. And I think she's a miraculous turnaround in the last 2 or 3 years to get where they are, especially this year. They've had a great year so far. But, look at Limerick, like we were, I suppose, in them depths of despair. And I think for Waterford, it's a crisis now. I think it's something that, something has to be done. Even for, like, they have a year. I suppose if you look at it, like, they're out, they've one more game in 2 weeks' time that they probably have to honour. But they have the bones of, 10 months to work on this, like, and get a solution for next year. I don't know, will Davy Fitz and Co be there next year? I think Waterford need to go to their own. I see Ken McGrath tweeting during the week, and I've listened to John Milan yesterday there, and passionate, Waterford hurling men, and maybe they need to go back and keep it in house, and they know what Waterford hurling is and what their strengths are, and to play to that, because I remember them teams in the 90s, and like they were incredible to watch. Paul Flynn, John Milan, Ken McGrath, Tony Brown, like they were incredible. I think they were like the Limerick team in the 90s. They probably should have won in All Ireland and didn't. You don't get handed them, but they were incredible. And I think that maybe that same passion isn't in Waterford it was then. I don't know, the players is driven. I think the players have a lot to answer for here. I'm not like, I think David Fitz this year has an awful lot to answer for, but there's a deeper issue that the players have to stand up and take ownership for. It's across the board. It's the minors, the 20s, the seniors. I think even if you look at the football as well, it's similar. I think they're not competitive in any age group. Minor, 20s, senior in football or hurling, and there's something more going on there. I think they have a lot of work to do over the next few months, and it'll be interesting to see how they will target next year. Will Davy get another chance? I really do think Davy's time as a manager up if he continues to play the tactics he wants to play. I'm just really surprised. Like Owen Kelly was an out and out forward. You know what I mean? Lethal in front of goal, and how do these guys, like, it's like not everyone bought into what Davy wants. And I think looking at teams in the past, Jesus, he broke Waterford the first time, and I think he's fairly close to breaking him this time as well.
Again, it'll be interesting to stick with Davy or not. But that comment from Liam Cahill after that Tipperary Waterford Alliance Hurling League game, back in the spring, really resonated with me after the game when he said, let's see how things shape up in the championship. In terms of, I think he was referring to last season, given when Waterford were on the crest of their wave, they'd won the Alliance Division 1A final with that comprehensive win over Cork. Things are looking up, and then all of a sudden, things collapse. I think Cahill's maybe referencing that maybe there was other things at play here that contributed, and I think it's certainly no coincidence that this year, with pretty much the same group of players, has underperformed again. So I think an awful lot of soul searching here, Kieran, for Waterford. But I suppose we can go to Clare here quickly. I mean, it's a routine win, but I suppose Tony Kelly with Aidan McCarthy out injured, really stepping up to the fold again, 13 points, magnificent. But the use of the long ball for the 2 goals I thought was fairly interesting from Clare, and maybe it's a tactic in the future that they might use starting with Cork at the weekend. Yeah,
I think they were just exploiting the space, Mark, because, as I said earlier, because the Waterford defenders are pushed so high, were playing in over that, and they took full advantage. I think looking back, they probably should have scored a couple of more goals, because had they exploited that a little bit more. But yeah, look, I think they were a little bit off the pace in the first half, but I think different team in the second half. Tony Kelly, okay, the score, it looks good, 13 points. I think he, taking everything into consideration before from play, but the wrong man marking him. Colin Malone, serious workhorse there in the middle. Ian Galvin took his goal very well. And they'll be happy. I think that what'll make Lohan happy is that they back up the Limerick game. That it wasn't a flash in the pan. They came out, they got the win, and that'll push them on again towards the next day against Cork, because it could have been a potential banana skin, because we didn't know what Waterford. They had the little 2-week break. I expected Waterford to come playing with a little bit more pride than they showed in the Cork game. So leading into that game, it could have been a potential banana skin, but I think they'll be happy to have their 4 points on the board and a home game this weekend against Cork, and we're in for two crackers, I think, this weekend. But this is what Munster hurling is all about.
Yeah, absolutely huge. Let's talk about Cusack Park, I suppose. What are the matchups that excite you most here, Kieran, on that Clare Cork game?
Yeah, I think the main thing for Clare will Ed McCarthy be back in. I think they've not that I've heard that there's no word of whether he'll be back or not yet. I do think Clare still have question marks at the back. They have conceded 7 goals in the first 2 games. Okay, we can make excuses for 3 of them from mistakes, but going into a Cork team who are going to look for goals, and they're going to run at Clare's backs, I think it's going to be a real test. And I think if Clare can hold out, and not concede, maybe 1 or 2, you can make an argument for, but a justification for. But I think if Clare can hold out against a Cork team who will try and get goals, okay, maybe the ship has been steadied from the first game especially. I think Cork, the word is that Robbie O'Flynn is out for another 6 weeks, which is real tough luck after getting back, and I think he's really important for Cork. I think it opens the door will Shane Kingston start. Plenty of people have said over the last year that Kingston seems to be a better impact player than a starter. So, look, no doubt Cork have plenty of options, but it'll be interesting to see, because I think Robbie O'Flynn is such a huge player for Cork that it'll be huge boots to fill. I think it's going to be a huge game. This is a huge game for both teams. Clare win, they've basically guaranteed a Munster final for themselves. It's their last game, so I suppose it's all out for this game. They will have a couple of weeks break after it. So Cork, sitting on 3 points, they have a tough task. They have 2 away games in a row against Clare and Limerick, and I think they'll go all out to win this one. It's probably even so hard to call. I think just based on Clare being at home, every time Clare play at home, you have to give them an advantage, because they've turned Cusack Park into such a, it's such a hard place to go and win. It's a big field, but the crowd feels like they're on top of the field. It's so enclosed. It's like a coliseum. That Clare they're on a high. They're on a crest of a wave, I suppose, with the minors winning the Munster title last week, and the 20s were so close last night. Clare hurling is on a high, and I think the Cusack Park will be full to the rafters, and plenty of Clare jerseys there, and this is going to be a huge game. It's so hard to call.
I'd agree with you there, because magnitude of a result for either side is huge here. I mean, if Clare were to lose another home game in Cusack Park, they're really looking nervously on the following weekend to the last round of fixtures, and really you don't want to be dependent on results in the Munster Senior Hurling Championship, particularly when you have Waterford and Tip in the final round of games, and plus Limerick, Cork in TUS Gaelic grounds. I suppose, from my viewpoint in Cork, is Tim O'Mahony maybe an option for Robbie O'Flynn? I mean, leave Shane Kingston maybe in reserve for maybe 20-25 minutes. If things aren't going well in the half-forward line, you can always bring in Shane Kingston. It'll be interesting to see how Pat Ryan, as you say, will play this with Robbie O'Flynn out.
I think the thing with Cork is you'll never know, because there's such a selection that, will they move Darragh Fitzgibbon, keep him up the field again? They have so many options. It's just so hard to. Other teams you can really select the starting team before the game, but I think with Cork we just never know. I do think Hannity definitely plays. Horgan I think will play as well. I think Decky Dalton, he took his goal very well, but he was kind of in and out of the game, I thought. After that, probably lacking a bit of pace. I think Robbie O'Flynn was the real workhorse in that forward unit, and Shane Kingston comes on like he is a live wire when he comes on, and he usually does contribute to a good few scores. By starting him, are they losing that spark or that impact? For the last maybe 15-20 minutes when it's needed to see the game over the line. Jack O'Connor, who was I suppose in huge favour 2 years ago and lost that bit of spark that he had that year in last year, and Is he an option? There's so many options. It's just so hard to know. But Tim O'Malley, I really like, a good player. I think he's definitely a live option there, right?
Yeah, indeed. And I suppose Clare's side as well. Shane O'Donnell will only relish playing Cork, won't he, after he's experiencing an All-Ireland hurling final replay. So, I mean, he's been prominent. He scored a few points, but I think he's due a breakout here. And I'm just wondering about Cork in terms of how they tactically match up on Tony Kelly. Will they leave him roving here in the middle third? If they do, given how Tipperary created goal chances against Cork 2 weeks ago, Shane O'Donnell could be in for a nice little bonanza day if there is space inside.
Yeah, I think it's one thing that after seeing how Tipperary got inside the Cork defence, that I think it's one thing Clare will look at. There's plenty of pace and attacking hurlers themselves. I think, I do think, Ed McCarthy would be a loss if he doesn't start. But even off the bench, like, Clare have options. I think, for the last few weeks we've seen Shane Meehan coming on, a really young guy with plenty of promise. Aaron Shanner, who I would say he's hot and cold, but I think this year he's been very, very good. Also David Reedy, he was electric there in a couple of the league games. I think he did. So, along with Cork, Clare have options up front. I suppose looking at the two teams, I think the real question marks is at the back, and I think Clare more so for me. I think they have a few questions to answer regarding at the back. If they do get through this weekend and they win, and maybe only concede 1 or 2 goals, this Clare team, they're building week on week, and be guaranteed the Munster final. And I think with the hurt after losing last year's and being so close, serious contenders for the All-Ireland series, if that's the case. But as you said, if they lose, they're sitting on 4 points and the fate isn't in their own hands. And I think this is the way, the joy of Munster hurling, and the ebbs and flows, and it's a roller coaster really, because week 1 Clare lose to Tip, and the overriding feeling is, geez, Clare are bother here, going into this year, and then 2 game weeks later and we're talking up for Munster final, and for the contenders for the All-Ireland series. So it can all change so quick. Look, we also look at Limerick, our own county, who've played 2 and lost 1. If Cork win and if Tipperary beat Limerick are out. We're getting to the business end now, so game week 3, or the last 2 weeks, like 4 and 5, or 3 and 4, this is where the business starts, and teams, Waterford are gone, but there's 1 more to go, and there's 1 more good hurling team to go.
Yeah, 1 big hitter that's going to go, which is hard to believe, really, this time of year. I suppose, Kieran, can I get a verdict from you? Are you tipping Clare here to beat Cork?
I think the worry for me with Cork, they were electric in the start against Tipperary. They could have had 3 potential goals in the first few minutes. My problem was they switched off. They went out of the game for basically a quarter after that, and Tip took over. And I think Tip did boss that game from that point. After that electric start from Cork, I think Cork scored 1-3. Tip scored 10 of the next 11 points. That's a huge worry for me. And I think Tipperary left that win behind. They were 5 points up. Okay, Cork didn't give in. I'd like that. They finished well. There's positives there. But you can't switch off for a period of the game and give your opposition a purple patch like that, because better teams will punish you when there's no comeback. So that is one huge red flag for me regarding Cork. Look, Cork, I heard Cyril Farrell say, if you give them room to dance, they'll dance, and they will. So I think they will run a Clare same way that Clare will try and to exploit Cork. But I think if Clare could shut down Cork's line of running, it kind of leaves they're a little bit one-dimensional. I think they're full of running, but if you shut them lines of running down, how good can they be? I think that's a huge question mark for me. Regarding Clare, I think the first day, they came in cold. You can make argument for the 3 goals mistakes that Tip benefit from goals from. But I think since beating Limerick, that game, the intensity they brought, their work rate, they were on fire that night, and getting over that Waterford game, okay, albeit not a classic performance, but being at home, gives them a huge advantage. I think that's the goal. Their last game, they've no more chances after this, and this is their chance to get to the Munster final, and I think based on that, I'm going to say Clare. I still think it's going to be a rip-roaring game because they're at home and it's their last game to get where they want to be.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Kieran. I think Clare's home record has been formidable, apart from that blip, particularly against Tipperary, their championship form, and Cusack Park second to none. I just think physicality-wise, Clare will bring it, particularly in that middle third. I think that may stifle Cork a little bit. I'm just wondering here in terms of if the game is in the melting pot or there's a 4 or 5 point difference here at the end, do Cork kind of, if they're behind, do they really kind of go all out here to get a result? Because they do have a Limerick fixture in TUS Gaelic grounds the following week. So I think it's going to be an interesting tactical battle, but I think Clare, look, they're out of the round robin after this. Clare, the prize is huge. 6 points, gets them into a Munster hurling final. You hear Tony Kelly all the time going on about Munster hurling finals, that he wants, that's the accolade, that's what he wants. So I think from that perspective, the team are galvanised. I think they'll win this by maybe 2 or 3 points, but I think it certainly will be a classic here, Kieran. And I suppose we can get to Thurles then straight after it. I mean, Kieran, all the speculation and rumours, I thought myself and you would be lining up for Limerick on Sunday, to be perfectly fair, but like Tipperary have shown an awful lot of good upside this year against a Limerick team who have lost their home record in the championship this year to Clare. I suppose it's an intriguing battle here of Tipperary, who are progressing, and Limerick, we're waiting to see if there's a response or a bit of dog back in the champions. What do you think?
I suppose I'll start with Limerick. I think if you look back at the first 2 games, I won't say poor. They haven't been themselves, I think, is probably how I'd sum them up. Certain players not, having the usual impact they have. I think if you can look at Kyle Hayes, Cian Lynch, Peter Casey wasn't too bad in the first game. I think he was, completely out of the game the last day against Clare. I think Tom Marcy has been the one, bright light in the forward, but you had a couple of missed chances the last day as well. I don't know, was it like heading towards like a downhill kind of a trajectory, but maybe the loss to Clare can put a bit of life back in the team. They've had a 3-week break from the Clare game. This is Tipperary, this is the old enemy. This is, even when Limerick are poor, they put it all out to try and beat Tipperary. So, and as I said, there is a chance that if Cork beat Clare and we get turned over, we're out. So not many would have said that 4 or 5 weeks ago. I do expect a huge increase in intensity. I think Limerick have been a little bit pedestrian, especially against Clare. I think, I'm not trying to take any credit away from Clare's win. Fantastic win. Come into the Gaelic grounds and do it as well, especially. But, I think that day Limerick looked a bit off. I think a couple of, like Gillard had a few wides from frees, which you rarely see. As I mentioned, Tom Morrissey had at least 2 that I can remember wides that were, pretty much in front of the post, that on the other day he doesn't have wides. And again, Diarmaid Burns also missed 1 or 2 as well. So, from a team that lost from a point, okay, it wasn't all doom and gloom, but, even them missed chances there, had they been taken, could have been a different result. But definitely, results aside, I don't think the same intensity has been there that we've seen the last few years. I think our, Limerick, we always kind of associate them with huge shot tallies, 45, 50 shots in the game. And I think that was down to puck-out retention, that I think teams have they're putting us under more pressure in the puck-outs where we're not winning as many. And that's why, we're obviously not retaining as many balls and in possession as many balls to get shots away. And I think that's probably a result of why the last 2 games we've seen 25, 30 shots in goal, which is, for the last couple of years, it was sometimes, I won't say double that, but there was at least another 20 on top of that. Our scoring, we were putting up, 30, 230, big scores on teams. I think the 2 games to date has been low scoring. So, something has been amiss in the first 2 games this year. So I think, we've had the 3-week break. I do expect a huge increase in, I suppose, in the workload and the work rate that they've been doing. I think they've been probably doing a lot of hard training the last few weeks. And I think for this game, if we don't, a huge, I suppose, performance is needed first of all. Tipperary played Limerick not so long ago in a league semi-final, and we saw what quality they brought, the intensity they brought, and this is their backyard. They're not going to want to be turned over. Liam Cahill has done a superb job at Tipperary this year. And they're in the hunt. They're in the mix. They sit on 3 points. They have Waterford their last game, so I think they'll fancy themselves to take a win there, to be on 5 points. So the potential win here could see them in the Munster final also. So they have their own prize. I think the biggest negative for Tipperary at the minute is the loss of Jason Ford. He's their talisman. That's like Clare losing out on Tony Kelly, or Limerick without Keane Lynch. He is the main man there. He's a main scoring threat. He scored 460 this year so far. Huge numbers. They coped on him the last day. He went off in the Cork game. I suppose big game, you don't get a chance to think about it, but I think when Tipper planning for this game and how to set up, planning without Ford is a bigger ask. Who comes in? Do we see maybe Mark Yo come in? With Shane McCannon start? Shane McCannon's very little hurling done. Does he have the same impact as he did? Super player, but obviously the age is going against him. But I think Tipperary will throw everything at Limerick. Same as they did in that league semi-final, and it's going to be a rip-roaring game as well. The two bordering counties, they have history. Neither of them want to lose the other team. Tip have been very impressive up front, especially I think with Jake Morris. Mark Keogh last day as well. Noah McGrath has been superb midfield. I think the one question mark highlight the last day as well is Tip have also conceded 7 goals, and I think if you were to strip back them and look at each one individually, a lot of them goals came from direct running, Tip full backline. I think if you can get inside that half backline, they seem to be exposed. I don't know, is there a lack of experience in full back? There's a couple of young guys there as well, Brian O'Mara, obviously I think Johnny Ryan as well. We've kind of saw him exposed earlier in the year against Peter Casey. So, I think that'll be one area that Limerick will try and a target Tip is to just run at him. So I think that'll be a job that, Cahill and Mikey Evans will have looked at for the last few weeks, is how they tighten up the back, because, whatever chance you have of beating Limerick, if you can curtail them to scoring goals, you have a great chance. But if Limerick can score 3 or 4 goals, it's an even harder task.
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up beautifully there, Kieran, in terms of the key kind of matchups here from Tipperary and Limerick. I suppose injury front as well. You alluded to Jason Ford out for 4 weeks with the hamstring. Don't believe all you need to see on social media after the initial report said he was unscathed. And I suppose looking at the Limerick side, how do you feel that full backline will fare with Sean Finn out for the season, and who do you feel will be filling in that cornerback position?
I think it all depends. There's a lot of talk here recently that people suspect that John Kiley might pull Kyle Hayes close to the goal back into kind of a maybe centre forward position. The last 2 days, I think he didn't have the same impact we saw 2 years ago, making runs from deep. I think teams are kind of they've allowed for this. They plan to ways to stop it happening, and I think if that happens, I think you could see Mike Casey and Rich English coming into the full back line, which will allow for Dan Marty to move to wing back in his place. Now you also have the option of Colin Cochran as well, so there is options there. I think if Kyle Hayes holds his position at wing back, I think you see Mike Casey coming in. He's an also hurler, but you also have Rich English on the bench as well. So Sean Finn is a huge player, our most consistent player over the last 5-6 years. Huge loss, no doubt about it. But I suppose there is cover, in Mike Casey and Rich English, and there's younger guys behind him as well, I know. But not to say we're not going to worry, like huge boots to fill. But Mike Casey is an Ulster hurler as well.
Absolutely. No, and even thinking from the Tipperary side, no harm putting James Cannon up there in the full forward line. Maybe putting a few direct balls into that full back line immediately, just to test out Limerick's rear guard, because Sean Finn does an awful lot of untold work there in terms of mopping up loose ball in behind, So I think from that perspective, I think Seamus Cannon would be a nice foil. He'd be a nice fulcrum for the likes of Jake Morris, particularly. And I would imagine Mark Keogh would probably start ahead of Johnny Ryan anyway, on Sunday as well. But I suppose it's tantalisingly, intriguingly poised here, Kieran, in terms of this game. I mean, like the Clare-Cork game, huge ramifications for the victor here. I suppose from your perspective, who do you feel will be emerging victorious in Semple Stadium on Sunday?
I think the most pressure is going to be on Limerick, but I think Tipperary were looking at last game and fancying themselves to beat Waterford. I think Waterford are, they're in all sorts of bother. So that will put Tipperary in 5 points. So I think they do have a fallback. I think 5 points is enough to see it through and be one of the three teams. So I think Tipperary do have that fallback. Now, not saying that they're going to turn over and let Limerick beat them. They still have if they win, possibly a guaranteed Munster final, which many wouldn't have said at the end of last year to see Tipperary come back with such a gusto to be in a Munster final. But so I think the more pressure is on Limerick, and I think based on the first two performances, we need a huge improvement for Limerick to what we've seen. They looked impressive in the league, but you can never look at league form. We've seen that over the last 2 or 3 seasons. I think Limerick need to come out a different team than what they have been. I do think the loss will have hurt. The last time they lost was July 2019. It's a long time ago now in Championship. I think that loss will have hurt, and hopefully it could be the kickstart that Limerick might need it and kind of restart the season. It's not all doom and gloom, obviously, but hopefully that loss will kind of kick them into new levels of intensity, and to bring it back to what we know of Limerick over the last few years. I don't think they've shown it this year so far. Look, I'm honest, I think Limerick are a super hurling team. You just don't become a bad hurling team overnight. I think Limerick will win. I think Ford will be a huge loss. Look, Sean Finn is going to be a huge loss for Limerick, but I think at the other end, Ford is really important for Tipperary. I think based on that, I just have to go with Limerick.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first 10 minutes will give us a great guide in terms of Limerick. And for me, it'll be the support running lines from the half-back line. We've seen precious little of it in the Munster Senior Hurling Championship so far against Waterford, and particularly against Clare. Really, it's now up to the likes of the Kyle Hayeses, the Dan Morrisseys, Declan Hannons, probably to orchestrate a little bit, but also to provide that attacking platform here to allow the midfield and also the half-forward line to really flourish. And I think that will happen. I think this is do or die for Limerick. And I think given all the rumours and all the innuendo that's going on outside the camp, it would be brilliant from a Limerick perspective to really put in a superb performance, in a statement of intent for everyone else in this competition to say that Limerick are back. And I think, to be perfectly honest, look at the weather conditions this week. I think it's primed for good running hurling, and the number one team that does that immaculately is Limerick. And I think if the work rate and the intensity is there, I can see Limerick winning. But I can also see Tipperary really posing problems here initially, like they did in the Alliance Hurling League. Barry Hogan's puckouts were very on point. But I think inside, I think we might see 1 or 2 goals here for Tipperary early. And I think it will test the resolve of Limerick here. But I think this team, they owe nothing to the fans here from Limerick. But I think this team have a bit more to give in this championship. And I would give it to Limerick to go on to 4 points and really setting up a magnificently titanic struggle between themselves and Cork in TUS Gaelic grounds on Sunday week. So I'll go Limerick as well here.
I think as well, Mark, you look at Limerick's record against Tipperary the last few years, they've had the one up on them.
Yeah.
I think also Liam Cahill and Mikey Bevins, they've struggled against Limerick teams as well. With Waterford, they never got to get to win over them. As good as Waterford were going, they never managed to win. So hopefully that'll continue on past Sunday. In
fairness to Tipperary, they're always very progressive. They're always very expansive in terms of their hurling. There's not going to be any really sophisticated defensive systems here for Limerick. I think it's going to be an awful lot of man-to-man marking here. I would say maybe an occasional sweeper, Ronan Marr maybe coming back in a little bit. But I think in all intents and purposes, I think the likes of Keane Lynch here may get a little bit more space around the middle third to really express himself. And I think, from a half-forward line perspective, I think the evidence is there, particularly with Cork. If you can get good quality ball into the half-forward line and turn at that Tipperary defence, the opportunities are endless. So I think it's going to be a fantastic game, and culminating in 2 quality games in Munster. I suppose we can look quickly at Leinster Senior Hurling Championship in absolute contrast. I suppose Saturday night we have Kilkenny and Dublin in UPMC Nolan Park, and then on Saturday we do have Galway entertaining Antrim and Wexford entertaining Westmeath. I suppose the Saturday night game probably looks the pick of the games here, Kieran. Kilkenny and Dublin. Do you give Dublin any chance here of causing, one, be a bit competitive against Kilkenny, but two, maybe causing an upset win?
I don't think it's very hard to make a case for Dublin, especially Kilkenny at home. Kilkenny, I think, have been progressing nicely the last few weeks. Mullen getting good game time, TJ coming back in, just slotting back in. Plenty of selection choices for Ling and Kilkenny. John Donnelly, and you have Massey Keown, and Water back in as well there, and Uncody. So there's plenty of class in Kilkenny. I think Dublin, probably looking at the fixtures and two tough games. They're away to Kilkenny, and then they're home to Galway last weekend. So they're sitting with 5 points. I think they're looking at the Wexford. Wexford have Westmeath this weekend, which you'd expect them to not slip up like last year and get the job done. It'll all go down to the last weekend is the Wexford Kilkenny game, and if Wexford do get a result at home to Kilkenny, which they have done for the last few seasons, that will put Dublin out. So I think there's, Dublin aren't home and hose just because they beat Wexford a few weeks ago. I find it hard to see Wexford beating Kilkenny in the form they've shown, but possibilities are there. So Dublin have a bit to fight, even a point I think would be a huge result. But I think this Kilkenny game is definitely one where they're not going to get a point. I think Kilkenny easy win at home. I think Kilkenny winning this by 8 to 10 points.
I'd agree with you there. I think the body of evidence here is Donald Burke has been a fulcrum for Dublin, and provided that Kilkenny do snuff out ball inside, I find it very difficult to give Dublin any case here.
I think you see Mikey Butler coming out, mark up
yeah.
Donald Burke, get a special attention, and we've said it over the last few weeks. If you can tie down Donald Burke, you're tying down nearly 50% of that forward line.
Exactly. So for me, I think it's 8 to 10 points here. But you'd hope for me all O'Donoghue here in Dublin that they do turn up. They're competitive. They're a bit better than they were in the Hurling League fixture down in UPMC Nolan Park, where they fell well short of the standards required. So, but look, I think Kilkenny setting themselves up for that Wexford Park or Chadwick Park fixture the following week. I suppose Wexford Westmeath. I suppose we are going Wexford here, are we, Kieran?
Yeah, I think there's a few injury concerns. I think Damien Rek, Lee Chin obviously with that shoulder as well. Not too sure. I haven't actually heard any news during the week there, but I think they are a doubt. But I think even so, you'd still expect Wexford to have enough. I think Westmeath have had their own injury troubles as well. Their main man, Killian Doyle, out. A couple others along as well, and they've been poor this year. I think Westmeath were nearly like a surprise package last year, but second season syndrome, like they haven't had the same impact in games. Look, they have been injury hit, so you have to make ease off the pressure on them a little bit. But yeah, it's hard to see anything but a Wexford win at home as well.
Yeah, no, likewise, I think it's been a torrid season for Westmeath. The injuries haven't helped. Once they've gotten one or two guys back, there's been another one or two in the treatment table. Killian Doyle is a massive loss there, in the from free taking and open play. And Wexford are fully aware of what Westmeath bring to the table after last season in Mullingar, and I think this probably comes at the right time for Wexford, particularly the shooting accuracy that we'd highlighted last week. They'll get plenty of it against Westmeath here, and I think maybe a 15-point win here, probably not out of the question here, Kieran. And I suppose Galway entertain Antrim and Salt Hill. I mean, Antrim have shown good moments here in the championship, and also against Kilkenny, I know they were hit early with that 3-goal salvo very early, but they did fight to the end. Do you give them any kind of opportunity or any chance here of really kind of testing the Galway team that seem to be building a bit of momentum here?
I think Antrim's best form is when they play at home. I think it's been a little bit, up and down when they hit the road. But, you have to say positive, scoring 320 against Kilkenny. It's a great score. And as I said last week, it would win many a game for you. But we're talking about Munster and all this hard hitting and week on week. And you're looking at Galway and Kilkenny and they're just trotting along, watching it from afar. And doing what they have to do to get by, and there will be probably no doubt in eventually in a Leinster final. I can't see Galway slip up. I think it's another another week for Shefflin to possibly mix it up a little bit if needs be, or I suppose they have this little bit of room for experimentation. Dublin last game, they probably have enough done at that stage to be one of the three, probably top two as well. I know Dublin's record against Galway is probably not too bad, but no, this weekend it's hard to say. I think Antrim will play well for parts of the game. They've been a huge improvement this year, and they will play well for parts, but it's hard to see Galway being turned over.
Likewise, and I think the weather again being set fair here for Sunday. Again, it's a bit of a godsend here in Salt Hill. There'll be a little breeze coming off the Atlantic Ocean, but I think from a Galway perspective, they're looking at a comfortable win here. I would think probably 10 to 12 points. That's no respect to Antrim, but I think it kind of all leads itself quite nicely to the next weekend of games here with Galway going to Croke Park to face Dublin. And I think that might be a mistake from Dublin, bringing Galway to Croke Park. I think Parnell Park would have been much more the better venue there. I suppose, Kieran, let's maybe look at Joe McDonagh Cup final round of games last Saturday. Really, the upshot was that Carlow and Offaly advanced to, well, we knew Offaly were already in the Joe McDonagh Cup final, but Carlow comprehensively putting Offaly to sword. A much changed Offaly side, 129 to 14 points, and it kind of made Laois's win over Kerry fairly academic. And also we had Down securing a win over Kildare in the Huckfield COE. So I suppose get your reaction in those games here, Ken.
Yeah, I think it was always going to be a non-contest with Offaly and Carlow. I think Offaly made 11 changes, so it was. I think well deserved. I heard a little bit of bad press for Offaly during the week, making so many changes, and I think Willie Marleash kind of alluded to that it was unfair, but I think they earned the right to do that. They won the 4 games, they were top of the table, they were guaranteed. Let's not forget, Offaly have had a long, few weeks on the road. I think they've played 12 games in 14 weeks, 15 weeks.
Yeah, I think.
So they're well deserved break. We look at scheduling the games, and I think this needs to be looked at for Joe McDonagh teams because you want about player welfare for under 20s not allowed to play 2 games in 7 days, but yet these teams are allowed to play 12 games in 14 weeks. It goes against all they think they're about. But to be fair to Carlow, they took the challenge seriously. They worked hard. I think they chased and they harrowed Offaly, and look, Offaly didn't have the same bite. They were turned over easily, and I think for Carlow they scored 16 points in the first half. I think Marty Kavanagh, he is to Carlow, but Owen Cahill is Offaly. They're both their talisman, and it'll be a huge game in 2 weeks' time, and Offaly do need a break, but it's like Offaly picked who they wanted to play, by resting the team against Carlow. It's like we prefer, we'd fancy our chances against Carlow than we would against possibly Laois. And that has to be a huge motivation for Carlow. We beat you by, 15, 18 points, whatever it was on the day. They're getting their week break as well and going into it. And, I think Carlow are going to give them loads of it. I think Offaly will be heavy favourite, but I think Carlow are going to give them loads of it. I think they've been improving week on week, and I think they're kind of peaking now at the right time as well. Look, Offaly have been really, really impressive, and I think of all teams, they probably do deserve to go up. They've carried the league form into the championship, but I think Carlow will fancy their chances and they will give them loads of it in 2 weeks' time. Moving on to Laois and Kerry. Look, I suppose both teams were technically in the mix going into the weekend, but I suppose when Offaly named their team, I suppose it was inevitable really. Carlow were going to be joining them in the final. I don't think there was much between them in the first half. I suppose Peaky Maher had a great game, but his goal in the 18th minute was the main difference, and Laois went in with a 112 to 13 lead at half time. In Kerry came level early in the second half, but then I think Laois took over. Then they rolled and scored a penalty, and after that, on the hour mark, it was 222 to 22 points. And it was like 2 different teams, the Kerry in the first half and the second half. Laois punished them further than with 2 late goals, but I think this is a really disappointing year for Kerry. They've been so close the last couple of years to winning the Joe McDonagh. They made no qualms about this year. Was that Stephen Dunphy heard them at the start of the year, and this was the target. They wanted to win this, and I think they've been really disappointed. And I said it last week. it's the same guys week on week. Shane Conway, Jordan Conway, Shane Conway 7 points, Jordan Conway 4 points, Patrick Boyle 3 points. Same guys. So maybe there's a little bit of strength and depth issue there in Kerry, and it's not going to get any easier, Joe McDonagh. You've a good team coming down this year, and you have serious competition there next year with Laois, and obviously Carlow and Offaly still there as well. So it's not going to get any easier. And then the last game, Kildare and Down. The wheels really came off Kildare's wagon over the last few weeks. I think it's got worse week on week. I think Down then had the joy of guys returning. Dahi and Owen Sands getting back in. Owen getting a goal for them. Good start by Down. Kildare, he came back into it with a goal, 22nd minute. Down responded well, scoring 3 points in the trot, and 15 points to 1-6 at half time. Look, Kildare, I suppose, were never out of it. They got goals at crucial stages. Had it back to 3 points at one stage in the second half, but Down kicked on again. 3 points on their own, and then I think their own goal on the 64th minute sealed it. Kildare got a late consolation, but the damage was done. I think it's been a bad end to Kildare season. They were such score or two away from Division 1 hurling next year, and now they're after being, relegated from Joe McDonagh to Christy Ring next year. It's a real roller coaster for them, and I think they'll have a lot of soul searching to do over the winter, and pick themselves up. They were bang there in the league, but I think they were really shut up in this championship. And I think, to be fair to Down, they had lost every game coming into it, and as I said last week, just scoring that 28 points for me against Carlow, I think they were just showing it a little bit better and got a little bit of form going towards the end of the season. It was enough to see off Kildare.
Yeah, no, it's a good round up there, Kieran, from you. I suppose from an Offaly perspective, look, you've under 20s, you've what you've mentioned, the under 20 rule anymore, to be perfectly honest, but Johnny Kelly and management, they were well in the rights to basically rest the players that they did. I mean, I think Willie Maher can complain all he wants, but Laois have only themselves to blame, particularly the loss against Offaly and Tullamore, and particularly Netwatch Cullen Park, where I was at, where they completely lost control and composure that game in the last 10 minutes. That ultimately has led to their downfall. So I think it's a bit disingenuous for Laois to be kind of maybe pointing fingers at Offaly. Offaly did all the hard work going into that last round. And I think the hope from Johnny Kelly and the management is that likes of Owen Cahill and Samson and Kiley and the rest of the Offaly players are refreshed and ready to go. But as I completely agree with you, I think with Tom O'Lally in charge, Carlow are hitting form massively at the right time here. And you have Nolan, you have Doyle, you have an awful lot of attacking forwards here that will take an awful lot of mining here for Offaly. And Carlow have a great record against Offaly. I mean, they won't fear them. I mean, last year they went to Tullamore and got a result that actually consigned Offaly out of Joe McDonagh. So I think from that perspective, confidence will be high. I think that'll be a cracking final. And I suppose, look, Kerry, I think it's an end of an era, really. I think all indications are that Simon Lumphy is probably going to step aside after 2 years with Kerry. Also, I'm kind of looking at the likes of Sean Weir and the legendary Pádraig Boyle. There's guys here going to step aside. You're just wondering where that replacement, where those guys going to fill in here. I think it's going to be a working transition for whoever takes on if Malumphey decides to go on. But I got gauged post-game that Malumphey is looking for other opportunities. So I think from Kerry, it's an awful disappointing year. And I think it's going to be a working transition. And as for Kildare, look, if you look at Christy Ring right now, Mayo are relegated. And if we saw Mayo's club hurling form at the start of the year, particularly, the intermediate on our final, you would have thought, geez, Mayo would have been up there in Christy Ring. They're relegated. So I think the fear here for Kildare is that this becomes a hangover. You have the likes of Derry, Meath, London. There's an awful lot of dangerous teams here in Christy Ring as well. So I think Kildare are just going to have to regroup. I think it's a massive disappointment, but all credit to Down, as you say. They built the form up in the last few weeks, and they've brought key players back as well from injury as well and work commitments. And I think were completely deserving of that result in Hawkfield COE. But it's a massive blow for Kildare. I think underage, hurling-wise, not much so, but I think from let's say, on the weekend and on the day that the Kildare under-20 footballers won, the hearts and minds of Kildare are still going to be focused on football and not hurling. And I think that is a massive blow for hurling development within Kildare. So hopefully they can bounce back next season. They're in 2A, obviously, and should be favourites to get to Christy Ring. But as we've seen with Mayo here in Christy Ring this season, it's a competitive league and championship. So I think, all the best to them. I suppose, Kieran, minor and under 20, any thoughts there in Leinster and Munster? We've had a few cracking games here. Leinster, minor, final, Galway, victorious over Kilkenny eventually. And also we had a classic in the US Gaelic grounds on Monday night where Cork edged out Clare in an absolute classic, I suppose. And also we have the under 20 hurling final on Wednesday night in Netwatch Cullen Park, Carlow, with Wexford and Offaly. I suppose, get your thoughts on those games?
I suppose starting with the Leinster minor, Galway, this team, it's been no secret made how good this team are. I think Aaron Nyland being the star of the show, 11 points. It's obviously their first Leinster title for Galway. This is their the first time going this route. And I think this is going to make Galway even stronger. Playing teams of this calibre like Kilkenny and Wexford and Dublin's give them more opportunities than they had before this, and it has to help the senior team in time. I think Kilkenny struggled to get scores on the board. They tried to make it a game at different stages, but Kilkenny only had 2 points in the first 25 minutes. And I think when you compare that to a rampaging Galway, took their goals well. Jason Rabbit, Brian Cannon goals. I think Kilkenny kept at it, to be fair. In the third quarter, they had it down to 5 points on one occasion. Galway just went up a gear, driven on by Nyland, and I suppose the late goal, put a glass in the wind. Brian Cannon goal put a glass in the wind, and really impressive team. And you'd have to make them half favourites going into the All Ireland final to get there. Galway are playing Cork,
yeah,
and Clare play Kilkenny. I think that's the minors, the teams left. Clare obviously were very impressive. Munster, you'd expect them to come over to Kilkenny, and I think quick surmises over Galway and Cork. Cork won't be not too shabby either, but you'd expect Galway to come over, and I think you're looking at a Clare Galway final, which will be a good contest, I think. But I think at the minute this Galway team are probably highly fancied. I suppose turning to last night, the Munster 20s. I suppose this Cork team for me, in my head, were hot favourites going into the game, and justified, I suppose, over the last couple of weeks. Cork obviously going well at this age group. It's their third Munster title in 4 years. Team Cork, I suppose in the first half especially, were strong. They attacked for goals, and slightly at half line, won 11-10. But Clare in that third quarter just ripped into the game. They scored 1-8 to Cork, 3 points in that third quarter. And 46 minutes with 119 to 115 to Clare. You're thinking, Cork went all sorts of trouble, but to be fair, they plugged away. They didn't panic. I think they dominated their own puckouts and Clare's puckouts. They retained a lot of ball, and they scored the final 6 with the last 7 points. So, they finished really, really strong to win by 2. Some really impressive performance. I think, Ben Cunningham, 9 points. Their captain Mullins with the goal. Took a run on goal in the last few minutes as well, and possibly should have popped it over the bar before he got swarmed. But really good performances over the field, and I think this Cork team, regardless who wins tomorrow night, have to be hot favourites for the All Ireland, because they just look really, really impressive to me. But Clare, to be fair, look, I think Keith Smith 11 points, Sean Rinn goal in the point. To their credit, they battled. Cork were favourites, but they give them a real shock, especially in that third quarter. And to me, they looked the winners at that stage. Looking back at it last night. But, it's like Cork didn't panic. And so looking tomorrow night, sold out Netwatch Cullen Park, which is huge. I think it just shows that the level of support in one way, but I suppose the starvation of success, I suppose, on the other hand, both counties craving a bit of silverware, 21,000 people for an under-20s game, which is massive compared to the Munster final last night, which had, a mere 5,500 compared. So expecting a real good game tomorrow night. I think Wexford, it's a lot of them players from last year where they lost out in the Leinster final. I think in the game they felt they should have won. A couple of them big players still there. I think Keane Burnby, one of them, huge player for him. Corey Dunbar from Ferns, excellent player as well. I think they soft Kilkenny the last day. It was a hard game, and I think Offaly, we're seeing maybe a younger team, that had this minor team who should have won an All-Ireland last year coming through. Haven't seen the Offaly lineup. I know Adam Screeney missed out the last day. If they can get him back on the field, huge plus. Young guys like Dan Ravenhill, Charlie Mitchell, we've seen so much of this year, especially with the seniors as well for Offaly. I think it's going to be such a hard game to call. I'm going to just going to give it to Wexford just because of the bit of hurt from last year. It's going to be a huge occasion for these young guys. A packed out pitch. I think it's going to be a great atmosphere there. I think Wexford battled hard, and they had to battle to win that game against Kilkenny, and that will stand to them. I think it's a young Offaly team. They're going to have their chances, I think, again next year. But I'm just going to give it to Wexford just based on being so close last year.
Great round up there, Kieran. I'd agree with you there on Wexford. I think, the hurt of last year, particularly against Kilkenny, being pipped right at the post there in that Leinster hurling final in Carlow last summer. I know we spoke about it at length there last year in our podcast series. It was a tough loss there for Wexford under 20s. But yeah, I saw an awful lot of resilience in that Wexford performance against Kilkenny. Past teams may have basically surrendered once Kilkenny rattled the 2 goals in. But this group of players and management seem different. And I think Offaly will bring an awful lot to the table, bring an awful lot of skill, bring an awful lot of organisation and work rate. But I think, Wexford, should do it. But that Cork under 20, look, they're so easy on the eye. But all credit to Clare. After 10 minutes, I was really fearing for Clare, but they really fronted up well. They got the run game established. They really got into Cork's faces. And being 4 points up going into the last 10 minutes, I thought they were going to be the winners. But as Cork have done so many times before in the Munster Provincial, I remember the Limerick semi-final when Limerick thought they had this in the bag, and then Cork basically rattled off 3 late scores to win. They're a cracking side. But again, it's an All-Ireland final there for Cork. They're only in there. And I think Wexford and Offaly, it's a free hit for them. I think because Cork would be raging hot favourites. And as for Galway, I think, to be fair, it's an Ireland Island show here. But that inside full forward line will take some stopping for whoever it is. I think that Cork game could be a potential banana skin because I think that Cork minor team are better than what they showed in the Munster hurling final against Clare. And I know, speaking to a few of the backroom members of the Galway team, they're very cautious on this Cork minor team. They think they've more to give. So I think that might be one of the games coming up to really have a look out for. But look,
I think Rory has spoken about Mark as well. Being involved in that age group it's hard to get consistency at that level. So
exactly.
While Galway have been very impressive to date, they can turn up and not show their true potential on a given day. So it's still wide open. I wouldn't say they're winners just yet.
And to be fair to Kilkenny, the scoreline may suggest that it was pretty comprehensive, but I think for long periods they did compete very well. I thought the adjustments of the management from the team that played in Easter against Galway and UPMC was far improved, better balance to the side. So Kilkenny are going to basically be very competitive against Clare in that other semi-final. Would not be all surprised if Kilkenny were to pull up an upset win against Clare. So look, I think that minor championship is one that we can closely follow here, Kieran, in the next few weeks. I suppose, Kieran, we'll leave it there. It's been a bit of a long one tonight, but plenty to cover. I suppose next week we'll have a look at the Munster Senior Hurling Championship, those 2 crackers at the weekend. We'll also look at Leinster, see how things are going here heading into the final round of weekend games for Munster and Leinster, and also look at the minor and under 21 games that have been taking place this week. I suppose until then, Kieran, many thanks. Have a great weekend, and we'll chat next week.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. If you liked what you heard in this podcast, why not subscribe to the Hawkeye Sidekick podcast on either Amazon, Spotify, YouTube or Twitter platforms. You can also follow me at Hawkeye Sidekick on Facebook and Twitter for the latest sporting opinions, articles and reports.